So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word, and this translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Mashiyach the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Mashiyach laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Mashiyach the prophet, we read sections related with many understandings of the Mashiyach himself when he was completing the spring feast. And as he was doing so, because of the spiritual condition of the people, the Mashiyach knew he could not talk straight. That's why then we find in the Holy Instructions related with the Mashiyach himself, he said then in parables, so then people who were then obviously endowed with understanding would understand, and the others, if they only had money in their minds, then they would not understand. So let's try to understand then this factor from the enlightenment of conversions. As we understand, these last few years left, the situation is very critical because there is a lot of knowledge that must be explained in a very short time. Traditions simply places the person then on standby. And let's then make this point, because when the Mashiyach first came, he was then rejected by his own people. When the prophets they came, they were rejected by their own people. And there is a reason why then Israel rejects leaders and those who do have the knowledge of the truth. So then, let's make sure the point is there are many areas or then knowledges coming from those who do have leadership. However, because of the times and the seasons, a lot of these leaders, they are not acquainted with the layerings of the holy instructions and also the understanding of the times and the seasons, and then the spring feast and autumn feast based from the reflections of the instructions and the prophecies. So then, had an experience myself where then I could no longer speak or then teach or then explain these factors, and sure enough, when the Mashiyach was explaining as far as producing fruit, he meant on a continuous basis. If a person then stops producing fruit or explaining of the Mashiyach, of talking of the Mashiyach, explaining of the Torah based from the understanding of the Mashiyach, the person instantly is, in quote, bombarded by evil forces. It is absolutely amazing. These last few days, those were very hard days. But then, the leaders giving decisions, sometimes they don't have the knowledge of what goes on with the outside in the world, because they do not have the understanding of the times and the seasons yet. And ignorantly, sometimes they give orders that they don't understand the consequences. So based from this factor, let's then read what the Mashiyach said in Matitiyahu, chapter then 25, and before. So then we can establish this topic, so then not only we refrain from being critical and condemning, and then we become fruitful as far as what should be explained from what the Mashiyach explained. So then, Matitiyahu, the 23rd chapter first, he explains of the people of the law, the leaders of the law. And he explains then, woe to you then, scribes and people of the law, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven before the sons of men. for you are not entering yourselves, and those who would enter, you do not let them to enter. And then he continues on. Woe to you then, scribes and people of the law, for you consume the houses of widows, and that for a pretense you lengthen your prayers. Because of these you will receive a greater judgment. Woe to you, scribes and people of the law, for you traverse sea and land, that you might then make one proselyte, and when he has become one, you make him double the son of Gehenna, or then infernal, that you yourselves. So what the Mashiyach is explaining then? He's explaining to me, woe to you, blind guides, for you say that whoever swears by the temple is not anything, but who swears by the gold of the temple is guilty. So the Mashiyach then, he is absolutely angry with the people of the law and the leaders, because they make for themselves a club, and they expect the world to be lined up with the ways they observe themselves in their own clubs. So what the Mashiyach is explaining is this. Obviously, he's explaining of producing fruit. The tone, the understanding, the core of what then the Mashiyach is explaining is producing fruit. However, he's explaining from the negative point of the people of the law because of the lack of knowledge. They want Israel, they want this understanding of this time to be lined up with what they wish. And what they wish for is then the third temple. So then, they are absolutely blind as far as what the Mashiyach requires versus then what they want from the temple. And then, when people are not cautious, they get caught on a whirlwind of absolutely hurt and confusion because they simply guide the people wrongly. Let me give an example. Speaking of the kosher meats or the kosher provisions. Now let me ask you this. You are a person who works hard. You are in a construction site where sometimes you don't earn very much. And you live in an area where then you can't buy meat kosher. Now, you are not part of the ministry. You are absolutely not part of the ministry, but you are being converted. Now, people who are leaders then, they have their own congregations, they eat already prepared meals. It is wonderful. Can you imagine? You are on the computer and then you read a bit the Torah, and then you walk around, you sit down and eat. And you don't have to go to work. You don't have to labor. You don't have then to go out and work in the field. You don't have to go to the construction site. You don't have to deal with the everyday trade of the world. Now, if you do not have the knowledge of this, then you go up in the front and you then demand that people be obedient to the Torah, and the person lives in an area or in a condition where they can't eat meat anymore. Now they have to eat other areas such as fish, but fish doesn't have any sustenance. And then you go out and you work hard, you simply don't have the energy of continue on. So it is important then what the Creator has said as far as kosher meat. Yes, it is, as long as you are in the ministry. Now, if you demand other people who are being converted who are not part of the ministry, then a person is working hard, and sometimes a person can't prepare the meat at home. Sometimes a person can't take the meals with. And then you go out and you eat, and you don't eat meat. The very product is going to give you energy to do the labor work. So then, the teachings, it is such as what the Mashiyach is explaining, as far as the leaders then going an extra mile to convert a person, then they make then the person a son of infernal worse than they are. So the situation then is gradual. You can't take a situation, for instance, and trying to make it perfect in a month. And you can give orders if you are never involved with the work outside of the world. You're always kosher your entire life. You have no idea what is work outside in the labor market and the fierce competition that there is. And then you simply demand Torah binding situation. You have to eat meat in a certain way, you have to eat in certain understanding, certain parts of then the provisions you have to eat, some of them you can't. Your life becomes an absolutely inferno. So then when they prohibit also people to come together and talk of what the Mashiyach has said, in some places they simply prohibit. They don't let people to gather around and talk of the Mashiyach. So then a person then stops producing fruit. Instantly the enemy comes and he ransacks the person. So there is a balance. So then it's understandable when leaders, they do not have the knowledge, they get self-conscious because, come on, did not have this understanding before, and this person is barely converted and has this great knowledge, but then they sense themselves they have to have this knowledge so they can control the situation, and the Mashiyach does not let anybody control him. That's the problem. The Mashiyach does not care for rabbis, for leaders, for roshis, and whosoever is. If a person involved with leadership does not produce fruit as per what the Mashiyach has said, it is merely knowledge. Does it have understanding? It does. But the Mashiyach wants the knowledge and understanding with his presence, where people can come and talk of him. It's not talking of the Torah. He's talking of the Mashiyach. He completed the spring feast, and he wants people to talk of him because he was the greatest example of obedience. If we only talk of Yaakov, then of Abraham and Yitzhak, those people, they were not worthy. The only worthy was the Mashiyach. It does not mean the other people did not have virtues and obediences. But the Mashiyach is on top. He is the very top example. And pleases him in heaven when we talk of him. We explain what the Mashiyach went through. So then people don't have a tendency of trying to control people and preventing them from speaking of the Mashiyach. I truly have made a mistake of listening to people saying you can't anymore talk with others, you can't have Bible studies anymore, and you can't teach anything else, but you have then, if you have doubts, talk to your leader. So then I found myself not speaking anymore, not producing any more fruit, not reading anymore the way I was doing in order to produce fruit. I ended up myself being caught by the enemy. So speaking of the Mashiyach is vital. The Mashiyach said if a person is not abiding in him, it's not abiding in the Torah only, it's not abiding in the prophet, it's abiding in the Mashiyach. He is the greatest example. And if we don't talk of him, we are merely clanging cymbals. So then let's make sure we understand this section and be cautious not to condemn the leaders, neither talking evil of them. But yet, understandably, we should point out the Mashiyach should be the focus of the entire understanding. And you can believe me, it is very heavy when the Mashiyach is not mentioned. You can have the knowledge of the entire Torah, the prophets, the understanding, and the insights of this entire section, but when the Mashiyach is not part of it, it is extremely heavy. And when we go outside, you have to go to work, then you can't eat meat, you can't eat chicken from the outside, you can't eat regular meat. And during the day you are doing exercises, you are working, you are spending energy, and then when you have to have this meat to give you the energy, you find yourself faltering. It is absolutely awful. So then those who are in the ministry, it is absolutely justifiable because they have their set time only for the ministry. But those people who are outside and they don't have the conditions of eating meat that is kosher, people then should have a balance on what to believe and what not to believe at this stage based from where we are at in your conversion. Because the Mashiyach explains very plainly, you go outside an extra mile, you traverse land and sea, and you convert a person, and then you make this person son of the inferno more than you are. So the Mashiyach is bringing balance of speaking of himself. So then, people make mistakes. But if we try to do without speaking of the Mashiyach, the work simply doesn't get done. It simply does not produce fruit. So then next time I'm going to evaluate more of the situations, because the news are coming out from Daniel 11 and the organizing of the armies of the Middle East. A few days ago the Northern Kingdom has visited in the Middle East, and it is absolutely precisely as the prophet Daniel has mentioned, as per then the reflected prophecies based from the shadow prophetic events of the Torah. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.